Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Dorr. I work as ISA's Director of Professional Development. Today, I am here with Kay Kimball Gruder, who is from Graduate Student and Postdoc Career Services at UConn. She is going to be talking about tandem job searches, so both in academia and outside of academia. Most of what she's talking about is focused on the US context, so that's something to bear in mind. Today's webinar is going to start with a presentation from Kay, and then we will have time to ask questions. You can ask your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring those. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kay.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And thank you for everyone who's joined today. My official title is Associate Director for Graduate Student and Postdoc Career Services. And then I also have a what we call a career liaison role with International Student and Scholar Services. And I'm here at the University of Connecticut, and I'm delighted to be able to deliver this session to you. It's really about maximizing your potential, your efficiency, and your effectiveness when conducting job searches in a number of different sectors. So I've kind of been thinking about business, which I interchange with the word industry sometimes, government, nonprofit, and academia. And again, as Sarah mentioned, it is within the US context, as I know that we have typically on these sessions, we have people from around the globe. All right, as we get started, what I'd like to have you think about is what I call the job search recipe. And it has a few ingredients. The first is to be strategic. And this is to be strategic in various aspects of the job search. Be strategic in the people that you meet. Be strategic in the jobs that you apply for. Be strategic in the way you design your application materials. Another ingredient is to embrace happenstance, or what we call planned happenstance. And that's really being curious and being very open to initiating conversations with people, trying new things, looking at things differently, being really open to a range of opportunities. The next ingredient is persistence. And certainly anyone who has conducted a job search before knows that that is very important, because one can get worn down by the process. So it is really important to make steady progress, ask for input from others, and find ways to really keep going. What I like people to think about is, like, where have they been successful? Where are they seeing momentum or experiencing momentum, and doing more of that than doing more of the, this hasn't been working, let me try again, this hasn't been working, let me try again, this hasn't been working, let me try again. Go to where there's been some positivity and movement. Another ingredient is resilience. You have to adapt, you have to adjust, you have to learn as you go. And one of the things I like to recommend here is to surround yourself with people who value you, and that will help to build and contribute to your resilience. And then throughout all of this, it's really important to integrate networking and communication. And you'll see how this kind of all fits together in what I share today. So that's your job search recipe. Today's topics, really important to look at the landscape that we do our job searching in. So we're going to spend some time looking at how hiring managers assess candidates, the role of the technology that they use, applicant tracking systems, which documents for which sectors. It's also important to understand the application timelines. You know, the job's posted, there's the interview process, there's the hiring. And in order to really effectively initiate tandem searches, it's helpful to have a good grasp of those timelines. And then we're going to look at the hiring process when it occurs through a job posting, a direct application. And we're going to look at the hiring process when it occurs through networking. And then we're going to talk about an approach with a high return on investment that is really a combination of applying to a job posting, but also engaging in networking. So those are today's topics. All right, so let's jump in here and let's look at some of the key factors that employers use to assess candidates, right? We all want to know how we're being judged, how we're being assessed, how we're being evaluated. Employers are definitely interested in whether you can do the job, quite simply. Is this an applicant who can do the job? Yes, I would provide some training, but ultimately I want to know that I can hire them and they can start being an effective employee. So they're going to assess based on how well you match job qualifications, skills, desired experience, knowledge, training, and so forth. Within the US context, they're also going to probably look at your digital presence. What we know there is that 76% of recruiters report that they utilize LinkedIn to both evaluate candidates and surface candidates, and also look at the alignment of a potential candidate to a job posting. And this is within industry, business, nonprofits, digital presence in terms of a platform like LinkedIn within the US context is not as important to the academic job search. They will be looking for referrals. Do you have a referral from someone within the company or organization, or someone that the hiring manager perhaps knows? And certainly they're assessing you based on levels of interviews. And for some positions, there's also additional tests. Those could be personality tests, technical interviews, scenario-based behavior kinds of interview tests as well. And then, quite honestly, they're often looking for ease of hiring. You know, how easy is it for me to bring this candidate in, or how easy is it to get them from point A to point B, where my company is located? So those are some of the key factors. Now that we have a sense of what some of the key factors are for how we are assessed, it's really important to understand the tools that employers are using. And the primary tool is applicant tracking systems, and we refer to those as ATS. And really, with applicant tracking systems, I liken it to playing a game of sorts, because employers set up these systems to basically identify the best applicants that come in. And I'll share some specifics about that. So these are software that manage applications and applicants from as early as the first point of inquiry right through to hiring. The systems are collecting, scanning, sorting, and ranking job applications based on how well they match a job posting. Basically, large and medium-sized companies within the US are pretty much universally utilizing applicant tracking systems. When we look at universities and colleges, they too are using applicant tracking systems to manage the applicants from as early as that first inquiry right through hiring. But they may not be using them in terms of trying to have the applications sorted by matching of keywords and qualifications and such. So still using applicant tracking systems in academia, but not quite in the same way that industry business use it. And then it's a communication system through the entire phase of the application and hiring. What do they track? Matching of keywords, key phrases within the job posting. They'll track whether an individual needs work authorization. They track skills. They can track whether you've worked or interned for a competitor. They can be set up to filter on specific schools. An employer could say, I'm looking for individuals with this degree who have a master's or a PhD from institution X. So also the academic areas of study. They can track your location in terms of, is this candidate within a geographic area or preferred area that we've set up in the system, years of experience, and a whole lot more. There are filters upon filters that they can put up in their system. This is just a dashboard of one applicant tracking system. It used to be able that I used to be able to give you like the names of the companies that were out there for the applicant tracking systems, but now there are so many that that's not really possible. And with this dashboard, you can see that on the left side, we have the name of the candidate, that they were sourced from a job fair, how many years experience they have, contact information. We can also see all the different emails back and forth between the candidate and the company. In the center of the page here, we have the individual's resume. We can see up on this upper dashboard that the employer can click out to a LinkedIn profile. Facebook is there too, but employers tell us that they don't really utilize Facebook, but LinkedIn we know they do use. And then over on the right side of this page, we can see that the individual has gone through some screenings, pre-screenings, assessments, and so forth. And this is just kind of one page of one dashboard, just to give a sense of the level of detail. And then people will often ask me, well, how do I know whether the company's using an applicant tracking system? My thought there is assume they are, unless you know that you're directly sending your application to a human. You know, if I know I'm sending it to Sarah Dorr at UConn, then I can be sure there's not an applicant tracking system, but otherwise I'm going to assume that they probably are. And so here on this slide, I've identified a few different URLs where once I go into the application process on the company's website, there's the applicant tracking system. So Greenhouse, IO, PageUp People, My Workday. And on the dashboard example I gave, we saw iCIMS, I think was the one there. But my thought is like, whether you're a detective and figure out, aha, they're using an applicant tracking system or not, assume that they are, unless you're sending something directly to an individual. What we know about these systems is that about 75% of the resumes are rejected by ATS. And this could be CVs as well, just depending on the kind of document that's being uploaded. So that's pretty high. 75% are being rejected. And there are some links here that you'll have access to that really go into a lot of detail about how to optimize your documents for ATS. There's very specific formatting rules, content rules, and you could be the best candidate, but if you aren't actually optimizing for the applicant tracking systems, the problem is the employer's not going to know that you're the best candidate because you won't make it through the system. Some employers rely very heavily on having the applicant tracking system do that initial scan of documents, and then the human resource professionals will take a closer look to see if the system is doing what they hope it does in terms of surfacing the best candidates. And then other employers, the HR staff are more immediately engaged in the applications that come in, but we never know sort of how heavily an employer is relying on the applicant tracking system. So we just always want to make sure that we're optimizing for those systems. And when you think about it, if you're optimizing for the applicant tracking system, it means that you're providing content that matches the job posting, which should show that you can do the job. And that should also make it easier for the human being who's also looking at your document to see that alignment. So it's beneficial in both ways, though initially you might be thinking, oh, I just have to get this to match the job posting. That's true, but you are then paving the way for the HR person to also see how well aligned you are for the position. All right, so we know a bit about how employers are assessing us. We know about some of the technology that they're using. And so now I'm going to move into which documents for which sectors. So within academia, CV, cover letter, and then likely one or more of the following documents: teaching statement, research statement, diversity statement, sometimes a portfolio, sometimes a sample syllabus, sometimes student evaluation scores, and other documents too. If you're applying to a faith-based institution, there's typically a faith-based statement and so on. So those are the primary documents within academia. Within industry or business, 1 to 2 page resume, typically with a qualifications section. And I emphasize that because if you add a qualifications section, you are showing, and typically a qualifications section might be, let's say, 3 to 5 bullet point statements that show how you're qualified for the job to which you're applying. So it's very tailored and customized to the job. Within the US context, typically what we see is we have the contact information first, right? Your name, your email, your phone, maybe your LinkedIn URL, maybe your Google Scholar URL. And then below your contact information, we would have qualifications. So it would be a section with the heading qualifications, and you could have 3 to 5, 3 to 6 bullet point statements that are using the keywords and phrases from the job posting and are showing the ways that you're qualified, and they're showing the context that you've learned that skill or applied that skill, learned that knowledge, obtained that training, and so forth. Our CV guide, our resume guide for graduate students, all that information is public facing at the University of Connecticut. So if you'd like to see examples of a qualifications section, that would be the place to see that if you're if that's something unfamiliar to you. Cover letter, sometimes. More and more employers are saying that they don't read the cover letter. And so basically, if they don't ask for it, typically you wouldn't provide it unless you thought there was something in your background that didn't appear on your resume or CV, but that you also really wanted to leverage. So you might still add a cover letter, but there's no guarantee if they are not asking for one that they would read it. And let's see. And then with a CV within industry and business, it's typically for R&D research positions where like scholarly publications are valued. So that's when we see the CV appear within industry and business. With nonprofits, typically a 1 to 2 page resume, cover letter, often, sometimes writing samples. You might see a diversity statement come up in nonprofits. I think once in the past 6 years, I've seen one be asked for within industry. Little less common there. And then with government positions, that's a whole entity unto its own. And the USA Jobs site, which lists government positions, you fill out a profile. They have a very specific resume format where you include the hours that you've worked at the various things that you've done, including work that's paid, work that's unpaid, and so forth. And again, there's a link there that dives into some of the specifics of that. All right, so if we're trying to coordinate tandem or multiple job searches, it's probably also really good to have a sense of the timelines for the various sectors. So when we look at business and nonprofit, let's say a job is posted in weeks 1 and 2, applications start coming in. In all likelihood, the employer is looking at the applications as they come in. Used to be that we'd see a lot of hard deadlines, like must apply by April 24th, we'll see that, let's say, but we won't necessarily, it's not that the employer is waiting around until a certain date to start reviewing the applications. They'll review them on what we call a rolling basis. So then in weeks 3 and 4, there's usually some pre-screening interviews. And that's typically if the employer is happy with the level of applications that have come in weeks 1 and 2, then they're pretty much ready to get in there and start doing some of the pre-screening 30-minute kinds of interviews with applicants. Weeks 4 to 6, more significant interviews. These might be multiple interviews on a given day with multiple people. That could be virtual, that could be in person. Typically toward the end of that 4 to 6 week period, there's final interviews and some requests for references. And then by week 7 to 8, offers are made, usually with a desire to have candidates or I would say start in within the next 2 weeks. Sometimes it might be 3 weeks. Sometimes it might be aligned with a pay cycle that the company has. But basically, they're hoping to have somebody starting to do the work 2 weeks after an offer. You'll see this exception up on this slide. The exception here is that sometimes major employers who are trying to bring in a cohort of employees, let's say in a leadership training program, for example, they typically would do their hiring in the fall, interviews in the fall, for people to start in, let's say, May. But that's not the norm for most of the jobs out there, but it does occur in these more like cohort-based kinds of programs. And often it's when a company knows they need to bring in like dozens and dozens of individuals at a time. Otherwise, within business and nonprofits, the jobs are available when people leave a position or when a new job needs to be created because of a new initiative, a new project, new research, a new line of business, whatever it might be for the company. Government jobs, they're a little quirky just in that it can take 80 to 100 days or more for the actual hiring to occur. This can sometimes be contributed to a need for additional clearance or background investigations. We can see here with government jobs that applicants who meet the qualifications are placed in quality categories. And then those in the highest category are sent to a hiring official. It's really the extent of the timeline here, and then the application process that's unique through USA Jobs. With academia, hiring timeline, typically late summer, early fall jobs are posted. Application materials are due in that fall, September, November window. Late fall, early winter, there's pre-screening of interviews. Winter, virtual or on-site interviews, and early spring offers are made for either a September start. I've been seeing lately a number of offers that include a summer start where someone might initially teach one course, let's say during the summer, or set up their lab during the summer, and then start more officially whenever the academic year begins for that particular institution. Jobs get reposted in spring for any failed searches. And, you know, like we'll see jobs posted year round in academia, but that's not the norm. The norm is usually to have more of the opportunities posted in late summer, fall, with the idea that people would come on board the next academic year. With administrative jobs within higher ed, we see that positions get posted when people leave or when new opportunities exist. And we will see a concentration of postings usually in late winter, early spring. Mostly because people may be deciding to leave, they give their notice, those jobs become available, and then people start in the summer or at the beginning of the next academic year with their admin role. All right, so chances are you'll apply to a job through a job posting, or maybe you'll get a job through networking. And I wanted to just share a bit about what that looks like. So if the hiring is occurring through a job posting, the job gets posted. Usually the hiring manager, someone on that hiring team will also ask around within the company to see if anyone knows anyone that might be a good candidate for the job. Okay. And then the job is posted, so all the applications come in, they come through the applicant tracking system. And again, we don't know how heavily company or organization is relying on ATS, but the applicant tracking system is definitely doing some screening. And then there'll be various interviews. And something interesting that occurs is that when hiring committees are doing interviewing, sometimes the priorities evolve for them. And by that, I mean that there was a job posting that you applied to, but as the individuals who are doing the hiring and the interviewing are going through that process, they're kind of thinking about and learning about other nuances that they might actually be looking for in a candidate. And sometimes some new priorities emerge for them, but it's not that they repost the job with the new priorities. They just know that, oh yeah, maybe we really are looking for someone who has a stronger, I don't know, data analytics background. So that's sort of an interesting piece that you can't control. And then typically they'll ask for references, and then they'll select candidates and make offers. So that's when you're hiring, when a company is hiring through a job posting and when you've uploaded your application. Hiring through networking looks a little different. Basically, the job candidate will come through a referral typically. The resume or CV is given to the hiring manager, and the hiring manager may go back to the person that referred the candidate and say, so tell me more. What do you know about this person? Have you worked with them? What do you think their skills are? So they almost do like a pre-interview about the candidate with the person who made the referral. And then various interviews will still occur, but sometimes there's no screening interview because the hiring manager is already pretty certain that the person they're going to interview has the skills, knowledge, and training because they learned that from the person that referred the candidate. Individuals have told me that in this case with the networking, sometimes the interviews are just a whole lot more casual. It's not the sitting down with the team and having that team ask you, 12 questions in exact order. It's much more of a casual conversation. And that in part is because the hiring manager already feels like they know you a little bit. And then references are checked and certainly selection and offer. What's missing here is that applicant tracking system. And that's pretty important. Now, will your document be loaded into the applicant tracking system? Yes, because again, we know that system is also doing things like keeping track of interviews and keeping track of job offers and all of that additional content, but you wouldn't be screened by the applicant tracking system for those keywords, years of experience, location, and so forth. So if we're looking at kind of the most or greatest return on investment in terms of juggling job searches, it's really this combination of networking and applying to job postings. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So if you don't like chaos, you probably won't like this because it's messy, but just stick with me through this. All right, so an individual here in my top left corner, sees a job or internship online, and it seems interesting, right? So from there, they're going to look to see basically if they can find any alums on LinkedIn or recruiters on LinkedIn and that are affiliated with that employer, so that work at that company. And then once they're within LinkedIn, they're going to try and have a conversation with a recruiter, sharing their value, sharing that they have certain skills, knowledge, experience, and training that might be of particular interest to the recruiter. The recruiter's job is to find candidates to fill jobs. And if you can help recruiters do that easily, it makes them very happy because they aren't searching for qualified candidates. You're appearing before them as a qualified candidate. Also within LinkedIn, if the individual reaches out to an alum, then they can ask that individual about what has it been like working for the company? Can you tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing? So the individual is also learning about the company, learning about the kind of work that's going on within the company. And the individual could also ask the alum for advice in terms of, if I'm thinking about going into this work, what advice do you have? Or if I'm really interested in opportunities at your company, what advice do you have? And then after having some sort of conversation with an alum, you might then ask the alum for a referral and say, would you be comfortable referring me? And typically, individuals say yes. In some companies within the US, individuals get a bonus for a referral that results in a new hire. And then the alum may say, sure, share your resume or CV with me. Another pathway through this is that our same individual sees a job or internship, and then they go right to the company's website and they see if the opportunity is posted there. So maybe they see it on LinkedIn or Indeed or another job board. And they're like, well, let me go to the company's website. What we know is that companies don't post all their jobs on these various job boards. They only post some of their jobs. So actually going to the company's website and looking at all the jobs can be pretty useful, because candidates then typically find other jobs that they might wish to apply to. So they learn about the company, they learn about other jobs, and they can then make a determination if they want to apply on the company's website, and then be really sure that their documents are optimized for the applicant tracking system. And then they might also go back to LinkedIn and connect with the recruiter, or again, try and find a recruiter and let the recruiter know I applied, right? That they applied, I should say. Because then the recruiter could tag the applicant in the applicant tracking system and say, I had a great conversation with this individual. I think we should bring them in for an interview. Additionally, what can happen is if the individual has checked out the company, they may decide to go back to LinkedIn and or connecting with an alum to try and get that referral happening. So this is this combination approach where you're kind of interlacing the networking with the direct application. Sometimes people will apply and try and go back to a recruiter. Sometimes people will start with a recruiter, and sometimes a recruiter will say, send me your CV or resume. And you'll go through the recruiter and not through the company's website. So it is messy, but it is very interwoven when you combine the two approaches. And provided you're tailoring your applications, it also has the highest return on investment in terms of time in, and then candidates getting the first round interviews. So ultimately, you want to set yourself up for the greatest chance of success. You must be more than your degree, meaning that you want to be able to articulate your value, your skills, your knowledge, your experience. I recommend that people really inventory those aspects of their background. There are certainly self-assessment tools out there that can help you do that, but you can also just start making some lists so you get both comfortable with having an inventory of all that you would bring to a potential employer. Also think about the problems that you can help solve. Businesses, nonprofits, government agencies, they're all in the business of solving problems. So think about where you align with that. And you'll want to use spreadsheets to track and monitor everything. You want to monitor the outreach, the conversations, the progress, the outcomes, things you want to do differently, the people you've met. And I would say, use a tool that works for you to keep yourself organized, because you're going to be really running several things in parallel. And when we go back and think about the documents that I shared for the different sectors, everything needs to be tailored to a specific job. You can have a foundational CV, a foundational resume that you're using portions of for the different sectors, but it's not like you can just simply, reuse and reassign those documents for all the kinds of positions to which you would be applying. You really have to tailor and customize the content, knowing that you need to get through the applicant tracking system. All right, you'll also want to engage in regular and strategic communication with others. So in terms of the networking piece, that's a must. Be open and chancy. And this is where that planned happenstance from our recipe comes into play. A lot of times I'll be working with individuals and they'll be in front of me and they'll be talking themselves out of doing something that they really would kind of like to do. It'll be a conversation like, oh, do you think I should reach out to the recruiter? Yes, I think you should reach out to the recruiter. It might feel chancy. It might feel like you might feel a little vulnerable doing so, but knowing that recruiters are in charge of finding people to hire for positions, yes, I think you should reach out to the recruiter. Use tools to increase your efficiency in job search. If you do an internet search of using regenerative IA or ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini or any of those platforms, you will get a lot of recommendations of how to use tools like ChatGPT to increase your efficiency. For example, if I'm working with an individual and they know they need to be in New Jersey and they know they need to work at, they want to work in biotech, ChatGPT very quickly, you can put in, tell me the top 10 pharmaceutical companies in, I don't know, Lakewood, New Jersey, let's say. And, before I've taken a breath, ChatGPT is giving me that information. And then I could go into LinkedIn and I could look for the employers and I could follow their pages. And then I could look for alums and recruiters at those companies and so forth. So I wouldn't rely on it 100%, but it's definitely a tool that can help with overall efficiency and also organizing Excel spreadsheets that you might create to track your job search progress. And then this is really important. Recognize what's in your control and what isn't in your control. Spend more time on what's in your control. So your effort is in your control. Your ability to complete action items, that's in your control. How you react to the current hiring climate is in your control. You can't control the hiring climate, but you can control how you react to it. Your preparation, your initiative, your ability to talk about your skills and value, those are all in your control. Your openness to seeing and pursuing opportunities. Recognizing that you might need to gain some additional skills. If you're reading job postings fairly frequently, that's a great time to say, am I a competitive candidate based on what they're looking for? Oh, I see that, 8 of the 10 jobs that I looked at today wanted someone who could do A and B. I can do A, but I don't have a lot of experience doing B. Is there a way that I can get more experience? And then in terms of some action items for you as we close here is consistently look for people and roles of interest, look for companies and organizations of interest, and talk with people. Find people to talk to. Look at jobs a lot, set up job alerts, engage in self-assessment if you feel that you don't do the best job of articulating your value. By going through self-assessment tools, they often give you the vocabulary to then more easily talk about your skills and strengths and competencies. Periodically do that gap analysis that I just spoke about, looking at jobs, looking at your skills and qualifications and thinking about how aligned you are and whether you have some areas for growth. Keep your CV and resume up to date, tailor it to optimize for ATS, and then make a digital presence and make engagement on that digital presence priority. And within the US context, most widely, that's going to be LinkedIn. And again, why is that important? It's important because we know that 76% of recruiters are sourcing candidates from LinkedIn. We know that if an employer has 2 equally qualified applicants, if one has a LinkedIn and one doesn't, 46% of employers are going to interview the individual who has the digital presence. So do we like hearing that? Probably not. Do we think it's fair? Probably not. But at the end of the day, we need to optimize to come through these systems as a qualified candidate. So I will take questions and welcome people also to share any direct experience they may have had that's been successful in the job search.
Hey, thank you so much. That was really helpful, both with the practical tips and the encouragement that it's a hard search, and to remember that certain things are in your control and certain things aren't.
Absolutely.
So we have 2 questions that I see in the Q&A right now. And just as a reminder, you can write your questions in the Q&A or in the webinar chat. The first question is about AI, and if you've seen any changes in the job search and interview process with the increased use of AI.
Yes.
So this person has asked, if companies are moving more toward in-person interviews, so the interviewees can't look up the answers to questions.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I'm wondering if we'll see a little bit more of that trend. I also know that there are tools now where they can look at a document and see if it's been generated by AI or if a portion of it has. What I've noticed certainly is that sometimes when individuals are uploading an application on a company's website, it'll actually ask if they want their documents scanned by AI. And I hadn't seen that until maybe the last couple of months. I had some individuals that I was working with share their screen with me. So I think it's possible that they may move to more in person, or I mean, with virtual, you can tell how well somebody communicates, but I also have experienced recently where people have been recording what the individual has been saying and having answers come up through like ChatGPT to interview questions. So we shall see. I think there's, I love the question because it's definitely thinking about, how do we keep the integrity of evaluating people and not content that was generated, right, by platforms like ChatGPT. So could be that more interviews are in person.
Right, and we don't really know where this trend is going to end up. It's still developing. So it's a really timely question.
It is. And I love that people are thinking about it in that way. And when I encourage people to use platforms like ChatGPT, it's never to give up themselves in that, but it's to use it as another tool, essentially.
Okay, so the next question is about thank you notes. So I think the question is asking about paper notes, but they could also be asking about email notes. So do people still send either paper or email thank you notes after an interview?
Yeah, good question. So within the US context, I would say that most of the thank yous that occur are through emails. That's not to say that somebody couldn't send a paper note. But again, like the most common trend is to do it through email. Are people still sending thank yous? My hope is absolutely yes. And what I call that is a strategic thank you. So in an email, you can thank the individual, the hiring committee, the individuals involved conducting the interview or interviews. And in doing so, you can add content that reinforces what a good candidate you are for the position. So after spending the day with the team, it became clearer to me that you're looking for someone who has A and B. Through my so-and-so experience, I've developed a solid background in A. I'd welcome applying that to the so-and-so project. So that's strategic. You're reinforcing the ways that you've further learned how well aligned you are for the position. The other great part of a strategic thank you is that when something doesn't go quite right in the interview, maybe you forgot to mention something, you can send the thank you again, thank you, but then you can say, after thinking about the question you asked me about X, I wanted to also share that I have experience using X in my so-and-so project. And I've been doing that for the past 2 years. So it's a little bit of a recovery, because sometimes we forget we forget to share something that's important or something that additionally shows that we're a great candidate. So I always call them strategic thank yous, and that's what I recommend.
And I think as more and more people transition to working hybrid or remotely, it's probably a safer bet to send an email rather than a paper note, just
Yeah,
to make sure they get it.
yeah. I also know that like some mail takes 5 days and it's not going that far from my house here, and you kind of want to more immediately get the thank you out there and reinforce or recover from some aspect of the interview. So that's a good point.
So there is a question on writing cover letters. For
Mhm.
the sake of time, I have dropped a link in the webinar chat on Career Yukon Write a Cover Letter. And this is a public facing resource. So hopefully this will offer some tips.
Right.
And there's a question now on, the next question is on hiring international students or non-US citizens. Um, do you have any tips to optimize searches and job applications for non-academic jobs that may be able to filter out jobs that do not have a sponsor?
Mm. Um, yeah. So that's like a longer conversation too. I mean, I'm happy for that individual to email me or individuals to email me, but yes. Most companies will have what we call a knockout question
Mhm.
in their applicant tracking system, and that's where it will say, will you now, or will you now, or will you ever need sponsorship? Employers are getting pretty specific in how they're wording that question. And we have recommendations on how to answer that, whether it's yes or whether it's no. And then you can find companies that are e-verified or have a history of sponsoring H-1B through sites like My Visa Jobs is one. And then you can also look for what we call capped exempt employers for whom the H-1B process is very different in that it's not part of the kind of quota system. But this would require some additional information. Yeah,
And
details.
maybe one helpful avenue would be to talk to the International Student and Scholar Services department at your university or college.
Yeah.
And the very last question we have is how can we maximize the chances that an unsolicited contact to an alum, for example, will result in a response and a referral?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd say that we can't control whether someone responds, right? So we might move on to another alum. But I think that bit about being able to be curious about their work, to be able to comfortably share your value and the ways that you feel aligned with the work of the company or organization. It's like if someone randomly calls me up and says, hey, I see a job at the University of Connecticut, can you refer me? My answer is going to be no, I don't know you, right? But if someone contacts me and shares a bit about their skills, knowledge, and training, and is curious about perhaps the university or the work that I do, then at the end, if they say, oh, I am interested in pursuing opportunities at the University of Connecticut, would you feel comfortable referring me? I'd be 100% more open to doing that. So it's cultivating a bit of a relationship with individuals, and also over time, cultivating a relationship. So if you're a year away, let's say you're in an academic program now, you're a year away from graduating, you could spend the whole next year cultivating a conversation with someone at a company, just even quarterly, letting them know what you're up to, sending them an interesting article. whatever it might be. So a little bit of that relationship building goes a long ways.
Okay, thank you so much, Kay, for your time and your information and for answering all of these questions. And thank you to the attendees for joining us today. I've dropped a few links in the chat if you would like to sign up to learn about all of ISA's upcoming virtual events, some of which will focus on applying for jobs like this one. You can sign up to ISA Connected, and you can also look at the list of upcoming events that we have, and that link is also in the chat. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you for your feedback in the chat. That's super helpful as well. And have a wonderful afternoon.